Warning, some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. She poured herself another glass of wine. Some dripped down the side of the glass. It was her second glass after all. The red liquid pooled around the bottom. She sighed, looking out at the snow falling as she passed her large picture window to make her way back to the couch. She settled, pulled her fluffy white blanket to her chest, and opened her book. She fell deeply into the words. Soon she drifted into the dark. Suddenly she felt a hand on her arm. Miss? She must have fell asleep. She cracked her eyes and tried to remember where she was. Again, in a low voice. Miss? Her body jerked. She realized the living room was dark, and in front of her was a strange man. All she could focus on was his black clothes and his unrecognizable face. Everything fell into view. What? The words came out of her mouth before she could even think. It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you, he said. Instinctually, she screamed and ran. Her body took control, and before she knew it, she was going faster than her legs could take her. She tumbled over herself, falling to the floor. His body weight fell on top of her. He was heavy, and she couldn't feel anything but his weight coming down, pressing her into the floor. She was clawing, clinging, scratching, just trying anything to get away from his grip, but he held tighter. He grabbed her wrist, and before she knew it, his hand was over her mouth. Shh, you'll wake up the kids. She stopped completely. She was now looking into his bright blue eyes and down to his dirty beard. Thoughts racing, she realized. He knows my boys are upstairs? He knows? How does he know? She stopped fighting, stopped screaming, and just froze. She looked harder, trying to see if she knew him, but she didn't. He leaned back, and she was free. She jumped, pushing her back against the wall, and cradled her knees to her chest. A strange man was in her home. He was here, watching her sleep. It was fear, no, a terror that she'd never felt before. Tears ran down her face. She didn't know what was racing more, her thoughts or her heart. What's your name? He said calmly. It's Alice. She couldn't find the words, but there they were. She didn't want to take her eyes off of him. If she saw him, he wasn't hurting her children. Of course it's Alice. You seem like an Alice, he said as he sat up in the sitting position with his legs crossed, his elbows on his knees that propped up his dirty face. I'm Nick. It's okay. Just ask me anything you want. Alice looked at him with so much confusion. She hasn't seen someone sit like this since grade school. In this place and time, it seemed so awkward. There were so many questions running through her mind. What do you want? Fell out of her mouth, the question most on her mind. Nothing really. I mean, all I want is a meal and maybe a while out of the snow. It's bad weather. He was stopped by Alice and another pressing question. Are you going to rape me? His eyebrows turned to form wrinkles. Again, he looked like a schoolboy, so confused. Oh, God, no, Alice. I would never. He seemed offended, but she figured it was a fair question. Alice, I'm not going to hurt you. Then what does he want, she thought. Do you want money? No, I don't want your money, he said politely. Then he just stared at her for a minute. His blonde hair, she wasn't sure if the color was dirty blonde or just dirty. It was greasy, almost sticking to his face. He had facial hair and a ball cap on. It was just black or dark, maybe. He had dark clothes, a dark shirt and a jacket and blue jeans. His sneakers he wore were dirty, old, and torn. They were still wet on the bottom from the snow. He looked normal, but still so scary at the same time. He was just out of place. Everything in Alice's home was white, clean, and fresh. He was a dark contrast to her almost hospital-like home. The clock on the wall ticked louder than she had ever heard it before. Tick, tock, tick. She didn't know what to do. She had no idea what he wanted or how she was going to get him to leave. Maybe I should just do as he says. The clock ticked louder. Tick, tock. Comply, comply, comply. She put her fingers to her temples. Okay, she said. The word broke the silence. He looked surprised and smiled slightly. Okay, let's eat, he said with a big, goofy smile. Alice followed Nick into the kitchen. The table was on the far right, underneath some tall windows. The shades were pulled. Above the table was a small, swinging light hung from the tall ceilings. It was a realtor's dream. Along the back side of the kitchen was tall, light wood cabinets. Alice had all the new appliances, and everything was in its place. Her favorite part was the long, wide, middle countertop. Nick looked so dark compared to the white granite. Alice sat slowly at the table. She positioned herself to see him. He took an apple out of the basket and took a bite. Then he opened his bag and put a banana and an orange in it. I hope you don't mind. He opened the refrigerator door and began looking through it. Alice stared at the back door. I could run. However, he would be left in the house with the boys. What would he do? How fast could I make it to the next door? It's the middle of the night. Who would answer quickly? Nick caught her stare and slid a Tupperware container into the microwave and set the timer. I'm not going to hurt you, he said. Ding! The food was ready. Nick sat at the table and dug in. Alice could see his dirty fingernails as he ate, sloppily. You! He pointed at her with his fork. Alice's stomach dropped. Her face went white with fear. You put sugar in your spaghetti sauce, didn't you? He laughed. Alice let out a breath. What was wrong with this man? Comply, comply, the clock ticked. Have you done this before? Alice asked Nick. Yes, one time in Houston, last year. An older lady, he tapped his finger on the table. Betty, I think her name was. She gave me some extra muffins for the road. Lemon poppy seed, I think. He trailed off. He was acting like this was normal, like an everyday, normal activity to break into someone's house. Alice was beside herself. So why do you do this? There are shelters to get food. She needed to understand what he was thinking. He leaned back in his chair. Alice, let's be real. We both know that there's a huge homeless population in America. Alice was speechless. Was this man really bringing this up to her? She didn't know what to say. Shelters are overrun. There is way too many people and not enough space or food to go around. It's worthless trying. Nick had already ate all the food in front of him. He did seem to be hungry. There, you got what you need. Now leave, Alice thought. She just didn't know what to say now, and Nick was thinking the same thing. I just want to rest a minute, he said. Alice took a deep breath. Complying wasn't working. I need you to leave now. She stood up, trying to make herself big. This wasn't her. Alice was not the type to yell or start anything, but she had to try. There was no other choice. Nick looked up at her. Alice, we don't want the boys to wake up. I don't want them to be scared, he said. New tears formed in Alice's eyes. She is trying everything. Nothing is working. Alice ran through the scenarios in her head again. I could run, but that would leave the kids. They are too young to know what to do. I could run upstairs to them. We could hide together, but what if that makes them a target? I could fight, but that didn't get me very far last time. The clock on the wall ticked louder. Okay, keep him calm. Maybe he will leave now. How did you get in here? Alice asked. Nick sat up straight, wiping the sauce off of his face with his hand. The patio door, it was unlocked. She stared in disbelief. Crap. You have a beautiful home, Alice. You should really be proud of all you've done. Top tier, Nick said, looking up and motioning to the ceilings. Alice cleared her throat. Why don't you have a home? She said. Nick smiled. It's okay. He knew it was a hard question to ask, and a very hard question to answer. I have been for a long time. I had bad parents, not a lot of family, and I made some bad choices. Alice swallowed. The lump in her throat grew. Bad choices? That was definitely a red flag. No, I never hurt anyone, not on purpose. I was an addict, but I'm clean now. But people don't hire addicts. We have less chances. She saw the hurt in his eyes. She knew it was hard. She had seen people in the corner as she passed. She had felt for them, felt bad for them. I'm not bad, though, I swear. Just then a creak came from up the stairs. Alice jumped up, but Nick was right behind her. He was fast and strong and put his hand over her mouth. This time she felt it, a hard metal pressing into her side. She didn't look down. She already knew it was a gun. She felt the round opening up against her skin. A flush of the toilet upstairs jerked them both. She was crying and sweating and shaking. She could taste the tears and the dirt from his hands as she tried to scream. Thoughts flooded her mind. Memories of the time she had with her kids, her family, and her friends. It was all over. She would die this way, in her kitchen. The clock ticked. Tick, tock, tick, then silence, for what seemed like forever. They stood in the living room, looking up at the ceiling. The cold steel pressed against her hip. It was round and small, but it felt so big and sharp. It was the weight of knowing this was it. Still silence. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Then Nick took a big, deep breath and lowered the gun. With his hand still over her mouth, he said, "Don't scream. It's okay." Then he removed his hand slowly and let her go. Tears fell from her eyes. He had a weapon. He could kill me, she thought. It felt like all the blood left her body. The room spun and everything began to float away. She dropped to her knees and then down to the floor. Nick came up and knelt beside her. He rubbed her back, and she just let him. In the moment, she was too weak to stop it. A few moments ticked by. It seemed like hours. The rug beneath her was wet from tears, but she didn't seem to have any more to cry. Nick broke the silence. "I have to pee." It was so strange, so out of place. It almost didn't make sense. "Can I use your bathroom?" Nick looked up at Alice. This was my chance. "Yes, please." She motioned to the half bath off the kitchen. Her heart skipped a beat. "You have to come with," Nick said. Alice's face fell, and Nick noticed. "It's okay. You stand outside. Let me show you." He stood up and put his hand out to Alice. She ignored it and stood up by herself. She wiped her face off with her hands. They walked around the kitchen counter and to the left, where the long hallway was. It went from the kitchen to the garage. On the left side, right off the kitchen, was a small bathroom. When they got to the bathroom door, Nick took Alice's shoulders and turned her around. She was now facing a white wall in the hallway. He was behind her in the bathroom. He went into the bathroom and explained the rules. "Here, you stand outside the bathroom like this. You face away if you want. I will close the door and, do my business. I will watch the shadows on the ground outside from the inside. So if you make a move, I know. Then I will, you know." He motioned to his hip. She looked down. Now she could see it. The gun on his hip, all black, tucked in the waistband. He turned the light on and Alice stood, her body facing the wall in front of the bathroom door. The hallway was small and darkly lit. Just to the right of her now was the kitchen. She looked down at her feet. The first time that she realized she had no shoes. She could feel the carpet beneath her. He knew what he was doing, she thought. He was smart. He closed the door behind him. She was alone, but not. She looked over towards the kitchen. Then she saw it. A knife block. She knew this house like the back of her hand. She knew she could reach it. There was a silence in the bathroom and a steady stream of noise. He was peeing. Now was her chance. She looked down at her feet, swaying and steady, testing how far she could lean from side to side. She had to do it now and fast. The stream was still going. She leaned over as far as she could go and reached out to touch the counter. She felt the cold, white granite. The carpet beneath her foot moved, but she still heard the stream. She felt the wood from the block. Her fingers were just able to grasp it. She pulled a bit and she could feel it teeter on the edge of the cabinet. If the knife block tipped over and fell, she would be dead. She could feel the sweat beginning to pool around her forehead. Her hand made its way up the knife block, touching the hard wood. Then finally, she felt the cool steel. There, just then, the stream stopped. She moved quicker as she grabbed the handle of the knife and pulled it towards her. The water began running in the bathroom. "I'm not going to hurt you, Alice." Nick's voice boomed over it. The door was still closed. Alice's feet were planted, but the knife block was teetering back and forth on the edge of the counter. Alice closed her eyes tight. "Please, please don't fall," she begged. It stopped. Alice suddenly had a knife in her hand, and then in the split second before she could think, Nick opened the door. Alice flew around to face him and took a step forward. It all happened so fast. She looked into his eyes as confusion waved over his face. His body weight fell forward onto hers. He was heavy, just like before. Then she felt warm on her hand, a liquid running down her wrist. She realized the knife was fully into Nick's chest. Blood started pouring over her hand as he fell onto her, and the knife in her hand went deeper into his body. They both fell on the floor in the hall between the kitchen and the bathroom. Nick halfway on top of Alice. It was the look in his eyes, confusion, hurt, and it just drained. It was as if he was there and then started sinking, the life out of him just sinking into the dark ocean. His full weight was on top of her, so she threw him over onto his back, pulling out the knife as she tossed his weight. She stood to her feet. She was covered in warm, red blood, and her hand was still gripping the knife as tight as she could. She stared down at the man on the floor, his dirty clothes now soaked in blood. His eyes were still bright blue, like when she first saw him. They were open, but he wasn't there. He was motionless. Alice heard the clock on the wall. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was louder now, louder than ever. She was frozen. Her heart was still beating in her chest, in rhythm with the clock ticking loudly. The last couple of minutes were a blur. The threat was gone. She was free. She turned and reached for the phone, but as she looked down, she saw her hand soaked in thick blood. Red-handed, she said to herself. The world seemed to cave in all at once. She couldn't call for help. What would happen? Would they understand? She suddenly remembered laughing with her son only hours earlier. She remembered the way his brown hair fell into his eyes, the way he giggled out loud, not a care in the world. Safe. She remembered the way he hugged her tight before bed and asked for his nightlight. Nothing would feel safe ever again. From this moment on, the boys were not safe. She wasn't safe. There was no thing as safe because of him. She placed the phone back on the counter. She began crying softly. She angrily tried to wipe off her clothes, but it was no use. She closed her eyes tight. Maybe this will go away. Wake up, wake up. The clock on the wall still ticked. When she opened her eyes again, she was still standing over a dead body. She looked at him and noticed the gun sticking out from his waistband. She reached down to grab it. She pulled it up closer to see it. It was small and scary. She'd never seen one so close up, only in movies and in cops' holsters. It was black, cold, and large. It itself wasn't heavy, but the weight of what it meant. This could have taken me in an instant. Then she noticed small white lettering on the side. Pro BB. It's a BB gun. It's a kid's toy. It's not real. Her stomach dropped. What have I done, she thought. He said he wouldn't hurt me. What have I done? Her mind raced, but just as quickly as the thoughts entered her head, they changed. No, fuck that. Fuck him. He broke into my house. He is the one. The bad one. The clock ticked loudly. She glanced over. 5 a.m. Oh no. My boys will be up in a few hours. They will come downstairs and see this, and see me, and I can't let that happen, she thought. She ran towards the bathroom and grabbed towels and started cleaning around the body that was now in her hallway. Tears started to stream down her face. What do I do? She began saying it over and over to herself. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? She realized that cleaning wasn't helping because there was an actual man in the way. A man, a very dead man. Okay. She stood, tried to collect herself, and then grabbed him by his ankles. She pulled on his legs, but he didn't move. She bent down, pulled with all of her might, and the body slid a bit. She didn't realize how solid he would be. Okay, 1, 2. Again, she pulled with all of her might. Little by little, she pulled until she moved him into the bathroom. She didn't even realize where she was going or what she was doing. The last pull backed her into the tiny half bath, and she tripped and fell directly onto him. He was still warm. The blood was still sticky, and it made her stomach turn. How could she be doing this? She crawled over the body and stood at the bathroom door looking in, then slowly closed the door. It was better this way. But when she stepped from the tiny bathroom into the hallway, she saw it. There, it was all over. Everywhere was blood. There were drips on the wall, pools on the floor, splatters on the counter, and drag marks on the floor. The red, almost so intense that it gleamed against the white walls and floors. Quickly, she grabbed rubber gloves and went to work. She began cleaning. She had cleaned up after her kids, so this wouldn't be so hard, she thought. She began vigorously scrubbing. Towel after towel was wet, soaked, rinsed, and then soaked again. The one white towels turned red. The bleach was almost making her dizzy, but she kept on. Red faded into pink and then white until it was all gone. Her hands hurt and her arms ached, but it felt so good to do away with the red. Every bit of it. It was a task to focus on instead of realizing it was blood, human blood. She shut the bathroom door with a bang. There, all clean, all better, perfect. She went upstairs and stepped into the shower. The water ran red at first, just like the towels, but then went clear. She washed the night off, the terror, the pain, and the unforgivable acts. She tried to wake up. This had to be a nightmare. This couldn't be real. She put different clothes on and then looked in the mirror. Alice, you are not the problem. You are a good person, she told herself. She put the blood-soaked clothes in a trash bag. She didn't know what else to do but toss them in the downstairs bathroom. There it was, the problem, all locked behind a door, out of sight and out of mind. Alice sat in her living room and listened to the clock tick until the kids came downstairs. They ate, put their backpacks on, and she drove them to school. Normal morning, nothing to see here. When she came back, she walked in, tossed her keys on the counter, walked to the couch, and laid face first into the couch cushions. Then she wept. The hard cry, the cry that makes you scream, moan, and hit the pillow. Her eyes were burning, and her face and shirt were sticky from tears. This was letting it out, she thought. The fear from the nightmare she woke up in. When she couldn't cry any more tears, she sat up and stared at the clock. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Oh yeah, the problem, she said to herself. She wiped her face and took a deep breath. Her head fell into her hands. What the fuck do I do now? It was too late for the cops, too late for really anything. It was done. This wasn't her. She wasn't a Dateline episode. She was a mom, a good person. It was time to get rid of the body. She walked slowly into the bathroom and opened the door. She knew that she couldn't pick him up. She couldn't even drag him, so... Then her stomach turned as she pictured what she had to do. I have to take him apart. Alice went to the garage and began opening boxes. She knew she had a handheld circular saw. She used it last year when she remodeled the porch. As she rummaged through the boxes, she thought to herself, am I really going to do this? I don't even know how to do this. I barely made it through making the porch. Some of the boards are still slanted. How am I ever going to take a body apart? Her stomach turned again. She hadn't ate, but now she may never again. Do I really do this? I mean, I'm a good person. I pay taxes, I go to church, volunteer. I am good. But I am left with no choice at all. I have to. Suck it up and get it done. Alice found the saw and brought it back into the bathroom. She plugged it in where she plugged in her hairdryer. This was insane. Oh, gloves and safety glasses, she said to herself. Wait, no, this is not a Home Depot project, but she did need gloves. She slipped them on her tiny hands and sat down next to him, the body. She lifted up the tool. The black handle was connected to a round blade. It gleamed in the light. It was jagged and scary. This whole thing was scary. Here we go. She put the blade over the body, an inch or so above the right knee, then closed her eyes tight. In her mind, she was just cutting wood. It's just for the porch, Alice. Keep the shoe straight. Alice shut her eyes with so much intensity that they hurt. Then she lowered her hand and pulled the trigger. The saw met the jeans that he was wearing and cut them like butter. Then the saw met skin. She could feel the resistance in her hand. She kept her eyes shut as liquid hit her face. More resistance, and then the saw gave way. Her finger fell off the trigger and the room went silent. All she could hear was her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Alice slowly opened her eyes. It looked as if blood had soaked the whole room. It was almost dripping off of her face and onto the floor. She looked down and his right leg was removed. There were two separate parts. It was something she had never seen. It almost didn't look real. Just then, the smell of rust filled the air. Alice's stomach turned, and liquid quickly came pouring out of her mouth. She was sitting right by the toilet, so that was convenient. Everything seemed to pour out of Alice's stomach. She wiped her mouth, took a deep breath, and repeated the process. Shut eyes, cut, vomit, repeat. Soon, all of his limbs were detached. It felt as if there was no blood left in him. He stopped bleeding, and soon it just became a task to Alice, just something that needed to be done, and no feeling behind it. She put the limbs in a trash bag and piled them in the car. She put the bags of her clothes in there with it. She came back to the bathroom and looked at the floor. Only his torso and head remained. She knew that she had to remove his head, but she didn't want to. Did she really have to? Most killers do. It's a thing. But she's not a killer. She didn't do this. She was a good person. So she bent with her knees and picked up the head and the torso together and put it in a bag. She left the head attached with decency. It was heavy but doable. Then she carried it carefully to the car. She tossed it in the back hatch with the other bags. She had thrown things in the back of the car all the time. mostly soccer equipment and groceries. This? Never this. This was insane. Alice went back in and cleaned the bathroom, top to bottom. She knew the smell of bleach was never going to get out of this house. She changed clothes once again, cleaned herself up, and went to the car. By then it was almost time to pick up the kids. It took all day. It was hard work. She didn't know it was this hard. She let out a deep sigh. Then she drove. She wasn't really thinking, she just drove. She kept looking in the rearview mirror like he was just going to sit up. The terror was still there. She finally found herself at a grocery store. She drove around to the back. She got out and threw all the bags in the dumpster. The big ones took her a minute. She had to use all of her might, but she finally got them over the tall edge. Then she got back in and drove to the school. She pulled up to a parking spot and sat. Just sat. The radio wasn't on. The car was off. All she could hear was the ticking of her watch. Tick, tock, tick, tock. She had done it. From this moment on, her life was changed. She was no longer the same person. She could feel it in her mind and in her bones. She looked down, and the tiny hairs on her arms were standing up. Just then the doors opened. She jumped, almost in an attack position. It was just the boys. She looked at her watch, 3:15. The boys loaded into the car without any knowledge of what their mother did that day. They laughed, talked loudly, and punched each other in the back seat. But Alice was quiet. She stared blankly ahead. It was a night like they have had millions of times. They ate pizza, though Alice just moved her food around the plate. She still couldn't stomach anything. The boys rushed off to do their homework, to take showers, and head to bed. But Alice sat at the table. She sat just where she had sat last night, where a man threatened her and her kids' lives. She sat where just feet away she dismembered a body. She sat listening to the clock tick on. Tick, tock, tick, tock. She feared she would never sleep again, so when the kids were tucked in, she took a handful of Benadryl pills and walked downstairs. For some reason, her bed felt massive. It was too quiet and too white. White and clean and void of wrongdoings. It was as if she needed to be where the threat was. She felt as if she could protect herself more. It was a weird thought. She poured herself a glass of wine, spilling some down the side and making a red ring around the glass. Red. She was so sick of the color red. Her stomach turned again. She walked slowly to the couch and sat down. It was as if she needed the ticking of the clock to calm her body. She didn't think. She didn't read or watch TV. She just sat in silence and listened to the clock. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Suddenly she felt a hand on her arm. Mom? She must have fell asleep. She cracked her eyes and tried to remember where she was. Again, in a low voice. Mom? Her body jerked. She realized her living room was dark, and in front of her was her son. All she could focus on was his dark hair and beautiful face. Everything fell into view. What? Came out of her mouth before she had even had a chance to think. It's okay, I'm not gonna hurt you, he said.